Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Dambi Uddo Natural Processed Ethiopia from Sognefjord. And there's the container right there. And Sognefjord, based out of Sogndal, Norway. And this is part 22 of our 24-part KaffeBox Advent Calendar series, and our second coffee from Sognefjord in this calendar. And one thing I've really liked about this year's Advent calendar is there have been fewer of the more heavily processed coffees, that of course being the natural and anaerobic natural processed coffees. But I don't want people to think that I don't like these types of coffee, as our number one coffee of 2020, as well as our winner of last year's KaffeBox Blind Taste Test Series, were both natural processed Ethiopian coffees, so I do enjoy them, it's just a little less common. And again, the way that this works, the notes and tasting are made with a V60. This cup right here is made with a Chemex, and we opted for our standard recipe, which is a 16:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 96 degrees Celsius, about 205 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, in terms of roast profile for this coffee, always a little more tricky to tell based off of a natural processed coffee. This one, however, was very much kind of in the middle of a lot of the coffees we've had to this point, as it's by no means on the more developed side of things. I think most people would still consider this to be a little lighter. However, it's by no means a very light cup of coffee, so very much falls in the middle of the spectrum that we've been working with within this calendar. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. And first impression, and the first thing I was going to look for in this cup was to see what type of clarity we were going to experience, given that it is a natural processed coffee. And one thing that was really nice was I could instantly tell it had above average clarity for natural processed coffees, as there was significantly less of the fermenty aspect. While it initially does start out maybe slightly more jammy and fermenty, it does cool down into a much more clean cup with a noticeable absence of the grainy quality. And that's something that's really kind of hindered a lot of natural processed coffees, and especially anaerobic processed coffees, is that grainy quality that comes with them. This one, lacking that grainy quality, already put it off to a really nice start in terms of the clarity within the cup. Now, the berries were definitely the most defining factor to this coffee, as it does skew more in the red berry direction. So ones I really liked were the strawberry as well as raspberry, as there was a slight bit of tartness to the berries, but in addition to that, there was a little bit more clean side of the berries, and typically I associate those aspects with raspberries as well as strawberries, and the cup in general felt a little bit more red. In addition to that, there was this slight orange quality present within the cup, and I liked to put that in the citric characteristic, as it was a little bit more of a sweeter orange component to it. But in addition to that, oftentimes when a coffee does have really nice clarity and cleanliness to it, I can see a fair bit of peachiness. So at this kind of middle temperature on the warmer side of things, I've noticed a bit of peachiness somewhat present within the finish, enough to really note that within our descriptor right here. Additional defining characteristics of this coffee included an herbal florality, and given that this cup was red to start with, you could definitely align that with maybe a hibiscus or that rose hip note that coffee roasters like to go to. And then there was also a bit of this extra herbality in the cup, and I was really trying to think on what I could align that with, but trying to describe herbs in a very specific and defined manner can be a little tricky, but just a little bit more herbal in this cup. All of this had a slight candied feel to the cup as well. So all of those things are really positive. I like all of those aspects in this coffee, and a noticeable absence of more fermenty qualities definitely did help the overall experience. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. All right, and just 3 level 4s, so let's go through those real quick. We'll start with the finish, level 4. Yeah, it has a nice berry finish to the cup, and it's got a great sweetness in that finish, so I think those two things just kind of go together. One thing that's really positive is obviously a lack of the fermentiness within the cup, so that definitely keeps that down from the level 5, which oftentimes even natural processed coffees these days can be a little heavy and overbearing. So seeing that at a level 4, always a good start, as well as the sweetness at a level 4, because a lot of the coffees in this advent calendar haven't necessarily reached that level 4 mark yet. So this one having that level 4 right off the bat is a very good experience for this coffee. You can definitely tell that this one's a natural processed coffee of some sort. Definitely a little bit more in line with the Ethiopian coffees, given the strong berry quality in it. So I like those both there at that level 4. Berry fruit. Level 4. Yes, easily the most defining characteristic of this cup, and the berries were very vibrant, very pronounced, which you would expect from an Ethiopian coffee, especially a natural processed Ethiopian coffee. So I don't think there's too much to discuss there. Now, in terms of the level 3s, we'll start with the body of level 3. Definitely more body in the V60 than in the Chemex. I actually haven't even discussed the Chemex version of this coffee because it's definitely not near as good in the Chemex. I get significantly less clarity. I get significantly less of the more defined aspects and a little less sweetness. The cup does have a little bit more fermentiness through this brew method. So I didn't even necessarily want to discuss that, as there's less complexity from this one than there was through the V60. So we'll just focus on the V60 version of this coffee. Body, a little bit more medium body than I think I was necessarily expecting, but I enjoyed that aspect, gave the coffee a little bit more depth to it as well. Acidity, level 3, that was a surprising one because there wasn't a ton of acidity in this coffee. If anything, I would actually say it was on the lower side of the level 3. I was fully expecting maybe a little bit more brightness to it, but I think that kind of goes with how the roast profile of this coffee was. By no means overly light, but at the same time, it doesn't really have too many of the more developed qualities to it. So hence why the acidity reaches that level 3 mark. Florality, level 3. Yes, I would say that was kind of it was the most defining characteristic that wasn't fruit-based, was this interesting florality, herbal florality within the cup, and I always like to align that, especially when it's in the red fruit, when it's in the red direction with that hibiscus. So I liked it there, and the one thing I would probably raise to that level 3 is the spice right next to it. I already marked the spice at the level 2, but as this cup cooled down, I was experiencing even more of that, and I wish I had a very specific descriptor as to what that kind of spice herb component in this coffee was, but it's fine there at that level 2. I don't think it was really overly defining of this coffee. And we'll go to the one level, well, actually we'll discuss the fruits again real quick. So the citrus, level 3. I mentioned that there was a slight orange quality to this cup, and since it was on the sweeter side of that orange, sweeter side of the citrus, I liked to put that in that level 3 mark in terms of maybe a more orange descriptor. And I also mentioned the stone fruits, given that this coffee had a more fresh fruit component to it. I oftentimes find peach in those sorts of coffees, and this one was no exception. But I found that to be really nice in the finish, very complementary to the red fruit characteristics in this cup. And now we'll discuss probably the most important thing in this tasting wheel, which is the cleanliness at a level 3. And I had a really hard time bumping that down from a 4 to a level 3, but here's my reasoning behind why it would be a 4 and why it would be a 3. I'll start with my reasoning why it would be a 4. The reason it could be a 4 is because it lacked the fermentiness. I've discussed that earlier, but I think the bigger thing is it didn't have that grainy quality, and that's huge for this coffee. So having those things in itself definitely made this minimum a higher side of level 3, and if I was really generous, I could have bumped this all the way up to level 4. And the reason I didn't bump it up to level 4 is simple. It's not quite as clean still as the wash processed coffees, a lot of the more standard wash processed coffees that we have reviewed in this calendar. So it didn't feel right to put it at that same level, as some of them are really clean, but they don't necessarily reach the same cleanliness as Gesha coffees. So had a little bit of difficult time with that one. It's definitely on the higher side of the level 3, definitely on the cleaner side of natural processed coffees. So that's one of the better attributes of this one as well. And with that discussed, I think that's kind of everything worth discussing within this tasting wheel. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee, it was actually quite positive. And I've said before that if a natural processed Ethiopian coffee, if any natural processed coffee comes out a little bit more clean, then I will very much enjoy it, because the only reason I haven't enjoyed these coffees in the past is they are very kind of hindered by a lot of the fermenty aspects. They're overbearing, they're too strong, they're too dominant, and as a result, you can't taste a lot of the depth and complexity within the cup itself. This one struck a really nice balance, as it definitely had plenty of vibrancy, especially in the fruit direction, and that's a huge selling point to me, as well as a fair bit of florality and sweetness, and those are the 4 big things I look for in coffees. So this one right here, one of the more enjoyable coffees I've had in this advent calendar, but not necessarily one of my favorite natural processed coffees I've had this year. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to, makes for a very easy recommendation, suggestion. Somebody that does like their more clean, natural processed Ethiopian coffees, because this one right here is that, has great berry qualities to it, and in addition to that, wonderful sweetness. So it has the vibrancy you're looking for without being overbearing in the more fermenty, heavy, dominant fruit characteristic direction. I think for the most part, I'll leave this review at that. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Dambi Uddo, natural processed Ethiopia from Sognefjord. Thank you for watching.